This is a mother, moments from a discovery that will shatter her world. Inside this girl lies her daughter, 43-year-old Crystal Krug. And this is Daniel Krug, the man who killed her. He's heading to work, minutes after leaving his wife's lifeless body hidden in their own home. For 4 months, this man engineered the most calculated homicide plot Colorado has ever seen. Fake identities. Manipulating Crystal's own children. Setting up the perfect scapegoat to take the blame. He believed his plan was bulletproof, that police would spend weeks chasing a ghost and eventually arrest someone else for the murder he committed. And despite nearly perfect detective work, his plan worked exactly the way he intended for a while. This is the story of a lie so elaborate it almost won. Months before her murder, Crystal Krug lived a picture-perfect life in a comfortable home with her husband, Daniel, and their 3 children. Both were well-educated, building a life together. But behind closed doors, a dark, invisible pressure was building. Crystal had been dealing with a stalker, someone obsessed with her, sending constant threats and claiming to watch her every move. The fear was so real she had officers check her car for GPS trackers. She hired a private investigator, covered her home in security cameras, and started carrying a concealed handgun everywhere she went. The stalker had a name from a distant past, Anthony Holland, an ex-boyfriend she hadn't seen in over 20 years. The evidence seemed undeniable: crude messages, a photo of her husband taken at his workplace. Crystal documented everything in a detailed stalker log and handed it all over to Detective Andrew Martinez, a seasoned investigator. The puzzle pointed squarely at Anthony, a man tied to multiple addresses and phone numbers, a ghost who was hard to pin down. But one early piece of the story never quite fit. Weeks before the stalking began, Daniel reported a break-in at their home. He told police he saw someone run from his garage, jump the fence, and flee. The only thing missing? A spare house key. It seemed like a random, frightening incident. The officer on scene advised Daniel to change the locks. What no one realized then was that this was no random crime. It was the opening move, a deliberate piece of stage setting. The spare key wasn't stolen by an intruder. It was removed to sell the story of a persistent outside threat. The game had already begun, and Daniel was the only player who knew the rules. The harassment against Crystal escalated viciously. The stalker, Anthony, wasn't just targeting her anymore, he was coming for her family. The message was clear: no one was safe. Crystal's world shrunk to a state of hyper-vigilant terror. Detective Martinez, committed to finding Anthony, hit wall after wall. During his investigation, he interviewed Daniel. And a new, troubling dimension of the story emerged: the Krug's marriage was failing. They were, in Daniel's own words, on the rocks. For a fleeting moment, Martinez considered a dark possibility: could someone inside the home be orchestrating this nightmare? But with no evidence, and with Crystal herself wholly convinced Anthony was her tormentor, the idea was dismissed. Then, in early December, a sudden, cruel reprieve. A message from Anthony seemed to indicate he was backing off, leaving the state, moving on with a girlfriend. For the first time in weeks, Crystal and her family breathed a sigh of relief. It was the ultimate manipulation, the final move to make them drop their guard before the final strike. In the brief window between Daniel's departure and Crystal's return, someone approached their front door, placed a strip of blue tape over the Ring doorbell camera, and slipped inside the house. Crystal pulled her car into the garage, stepped out, and closed the door. She had no idea someone was waiting for her inside her own home. The attack was swift and brutal. Hours later, Daniel, from his office, tried calling his wife. No answer. Texts went in red. A growing sense of staged panic led him to call the police to request a welfare check. At almost the same time, he called Crystal's mother, asking her to go check on her daughter, and knowingly sending her into the heart of the horror. An officer arrived first. The house was quiet, but a feeling nagged at him. He moved his patrol car closer, peered into the garage window, and saw the unthinkable, a body on the floor. He kicked in the front door and found Crystal Krug with a severe head wound, a pool of blood smeared across the wall. He began frantic CPR just as the garage door began to rise to allow paramedics access. And there, framed in the opening, was Crystal's mother, arriving to see an officer performing chest compressions on her daughter. She was quickly pulled away, shielded from the grim scene. Medics took over, but their efforts were futile. As they cut away Crystal's clothing, they found the true cause of death, a single, vicious stab wound to the chest. Beside her body, inside her purse, was the loaded handgun she never had a chance to reach for. The scene told a story of calculation, the taped-over camera, the unlocked door. This was not a crime of passion, it was an execution. To everyone, the family, the first responders, the detectives, the killer was obvious. It had to be the stalker, Anthony Holland. A nationwide warrant was issued. Every law enforcement agency was told to be on the lookout. Meanwhile, the painful process of notifying the family unfolded. Daniel arrived on scene, playing the role of the devastated husband to perfection, embraced by Crystal's grieving mother who had no idea the man she was comforting was her daughter's killer. The children were collected from school, their world shattered. The oldest daughter revealed a chilling detail to detectives. The stalker had been posting online trying to recruit others and had been framing the narrative to make it look like Crystal was secretly in cahoots with him to kill Daniel. It was a diabolical layer to the plot, designed to turn the children against their mother and paint Daniel as the ultimate victim. But the investigation was about to turn on its axis. When detectives finally located Anthony Holland in Utah, they found a confused, intoxicated man with a rock-solid alibi. Surveillance footage and receipts placed him hundreds of miles away at the time of the murder. He hadn't been to Colorado in years. The prime suspect had just evaporated. At the same moment, the digital evidence detectives had been waiting for finally arrived. And it pointed to a shocking, much closer location. The threatening emails sent to Crystal, the ones that terrorized her for months, originated from IP addresses at Daniel's workplace. The focus of the investigation shifted violently. Detectives then unearthed a forgotten police report from years earlier, a stalking complaint filed by Daniel's previous girlfriend. The pattern was identical: fake online personas, psychological torment, an attempt to isolate and control. A terrifying new theory crystallized. What if there was no Anthony Holland? What if Daniel had been the stalker all along? Armed with this revelation, detectives brought Daniel in for a second interview. They presented him with the digital evidence, the IP addresses tracing back to his office. They laid out the narrative of a man terrified of losing his family in a divorce, a man who created a monstrous external threat to scare his wife back into dependency, to make himself the hero and protector. And when that wife began to suspect the terrifying truth, when the fiction threatened to collapse, the only way out was to make her disappear. And to make the fictional stalker he created take the blame. Daniel, faced with the collapsing walls of his story, calmly asked for a lawyer. The interview was over, but the case was now wide open. The final, irrefutable evidence flooded in. The burner phones used to send the threatening texts were purchased with a Visa gift card registered to Daniel Krug. Cell tower records proved those burner phones were always in the same location as Daniel's personal cell phone. He was carrying both devices. And perhaps most damning of all, Daniel's internet search history from the night before the murder. How hard would you have to hit someone in the head to make them unconscious? And when is a head injury a cause for concern? There was no mysterious stalker. It was always Daniel. He had authored the entire terrifying story, playing both the villain and the victim. He was arrested, convicted of first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This was more than a murder. It was a months-long psychological siege, a masterpiece of manipulation where the villain played the victim in a story he wrote himself. He weaponized his own children's fear, exploited a mother's love, and used the system designed to protect against a threat he alone had invented. In the end, the most calculated plot Colorado had ever seen had a fatal flaw. The killer underestimated the detectives who refused to stop looking for the truth. And he overestimated his own ability to live a lie. The story he crafted was perfect. But he forgot that in reality, the author always leaves fingerprints.